Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I can see from the list of attendees that we have quite a lot of existing MPS customers on the call today, as well as some new names. So, for the benefit of the new names, and just as a little bit of an update for those of you who are familiar with MPS, let me just give you a brief run through of MPS, the business, and what it is we're all about, and also why we partner with Barracuda. So, okay, MPS has been around for a long time, formed in 1991, so 33 years. And today, our business is really all about designing, delivering, monitoring, managing and supporting end-to-end voice data, IT and cybersecurity solutions for around about 1,000 customers throughout the UK. Those customers are a mix of small to medium-sized enterprises, small corporates, healthcare and education. Voice is where we started, selling traditional on-premises telephone systems. And we still support some of those installations. Not though. Most have now migrated to the cloud, and our current voice business is all about the ongoing migration work and also developing our cloud offering. By way of example, we recently developed a best-of-breed solution for medical practices by integrating cloud services from 3 separate vendors. And that solution is now featured on the NHS Better Purchasing framework. Mobile has always been an important part of our portfolio. We connect to O2, Vodafone, EE and 3. The majority of SIMs are still going into smartphones, whilst connections to various Internet of Things, or Internet of Everything, as it's often referred to nowadays, are definitely on the increase. Data networking, anything to do with local area networking, wide area networking, we pretty much do it, including all current connectivity variants for direct internet access, private wide area networking, and increasingly nowadays we're using software-defined wide area networking tools to provide bandwidth management and failover. Switching and routing are very much core parts of our data networking portfolio, as you would expect, and we also provide co-location facilities. Our IT business, we're a Microsoft partner, and we provide first, second and third line cloud computing, server and desktop systems design, implementation and support. This can be a fully outsourced solution, where a customer may have no internal IT expertise at all, or in the alternative, we can work with customers' own IT resource and, of course, their third-party application providers. So, cybersecurity, last but not least. Cybersecurity has become an increasingly important part of our business over the last few years as the threat landscape has grown. We take a multi-layered approach, and I'll elaborate in this area at the end of the webinar. So that kind of summarizes our portfolio, but finally, just a note in terms of current ownership. MPS joined the SCG, Southern Communications group of companies, in July last year, and a major factor in that decision was the level of investment we felt was required to continue to develop our IT and cybersecurity offerings. SCG, much larger organization than MPS in autonomy, as you would expect, employing around 770 staff with sales revenues of around about £170 million a year and 24,000 customers. Today, we're co-hosting this webinar with Barracuda, a key strategic MPS partner. And as you can see from the slide, Barracuda has been around for 21 years, from 2003, and we've been partnering with Barracuda since 2021. Why? Because it's a well-established, substantial business with around 2,000 staff and 200,000 end-user customers. Whilst Barracuda is continually developing its portfolio, it has a market-leading email protection product, which is a critical component in the MPS portfolio. Critical, as we know that something like 94% of data breaches are reckoned to start with an email. So all that said, without more ado, I'd like to hand over to Rob for the main part of today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, morning, everyone. So very brief introduction. My name's Rob Anderson. I've been working for Barracuda for about 8 years. And obviously prior to joining the business, I was actually a Barracuda customer. So I've been on both sides of the fence, predominantly focused on IT and cybersecurity. But again, today really is about kind of taking you through what we and MPS are seeing in the market, and hopefully giving you some good insight into how threats are evolving, and at the end we'll give you a kind of live overview of how attackers are leveraging these modern tools like AI to simplify their processes and obviously make their attacks more complicated. So let's get started. There is a Q&A button on the webinar app, so if you have any questions, I can see one's come in already, which is great. If you post those in there, we'll either go through those at the end, or we'll answer them as we go through. So what we want to do to start is really take a look at the overall cybersecurity landscape and how it's evolved over time. I don't think we need to go too far back in the past, but there's plenty enough going on between 2021 and 2024 to talk about. But I think a recap is always good. 2000 to 2007, cyber attacks have gone from being intrusive and annoying to being disruptive. Hackers figured out how to create and launch ransomware around 2007. By 2014, they actually started becoming disruptive with access to the Internet of Things, or IoT, as Tim mentioned before, and cyber attacks became a really costly and sometimes business-ending event for a lot of organizations. By 2022, we saw the growth of the Internet of Everything, which dramatically changed with the use of almost every device having some form of connection to the Internet. Now, I'm the first one to admit that the Internet is a powerful business tool. It makes us more efficient. It allows us to communicate more effectively. It allows us to establish a larger footprint for our organization and contact a wider distribution of customers. Companies can now go from a global office in Reading, for example, to a global company by leveraging the Internet. The problem is, business people look at the Internet as a critical business tool, but the attackers, they see an opportunity to break into your business. And we're going to go into that in more detail during the presentation. If we fast forward to today, and AI technologies like ChatGPT, they're extremely compelling for organizations, but it opens a whole new world for cyber criminals to take advantage of and further evolve their approach. We can expect the impact of these evolutions to be colossal, and we're starting to see that today. The other reason we see an increase in cybersecurity instances is non-state actors. So, less than 10 years ago, 90% of attacks we saw were nation state to nation state. In other words, Korea, Russia, Iran, for example, would attack the US, and then the US would do the same in kind. Now that we're seeing non-state actors, people with average computer skills going onto the dark web and purchasing sophisticated hacking tools, it's very easy for almost anyone to go and carry out an attack. We can all agree that with this evolution, crime has changed. So no longer is it profitable to try and physically break into a building and steal someone's assets from an office. It's much easier to go ahead and steal that information digitally. And that's because there's more valuable information online. That could be credit card information, it could be personal information, personal emails, account credentials. If you think of the services you use online and how you interact with those, the value around that data is enormous. And all of these things could be ransoms or sold to other people and used for various purposes. The number of ransom attacks, continues to increase year on year. We hear this in the news every week. I don't know about you, but it feels like, every morning there is some new large enterprise or local infrastructure, for example, that's been hit. And we get bombarded with the name and who was attacked and, what they're going to do about it. But we actually forget that this could happen to any of us on this webinar. We're getting so immune to it, we're getting so numb to it that, we're starting to lose that caution of it could happen to me. It's always the big companies that make the news, but realistically, this is a much bigger issue. Now, in the time that I've been talking, probably 20 or 30 attacks have gone on around the world, if not more. And the tough thing is it's become very automated and very easy for attackers to facilitate these and try and see who's vulnerable. It's not necessarily people sat in a room trying to work it out. They'll have bots scraping the internet. There's that automation piece to make it as easy as possible for the attacker. And we've all seen the headlines, Twitter, MailChimp, for example, they've been infiltrated and attacked. And unfortunately, as I said, people are becoming immune to it. It's just another enterprise. It's never going to happen to a smaller business or to me. The unfortunate thing is that's the exact opposite of what we're seeing. These attacks are becoming more prevalent because they're more automated. It's easier for attackers to execute. They don't need the same level of education or the same resources behind them to do it. Anyone can go out and buy a toolkit and start attacking people and see which information they can extract. Now, it's estimated that an organization suffered a ransomware attack every 11 seconds in 2021, and that's according to Cybersecurity Ventures. And it's actually expected that there'll be a new attack on a consumer or business every 2 seconds by 2031. Global ransomware damages costs are predicted to exceed 265 billion by 2031. It's basically sounding like 2031 is not going to be a great time if the growth continues the way that we're seeing. Now, we all know that there is a deliberate monetary value associated with a ransomware attack. They're not necessarily doing it just to be annoying. They're doing it for monetary gain. Average costs of a ransomware attack were tipping over the $4 million mark in 2022. And if you're a target and you get attacked right before the holidays, for example, how many people lost sales because their business was down, or lost revenue because their staff couldn't work because their IT infrastructure was unavailable. And we talk about the evolution of ransomware. We're going to go through that a little bit now. I think before we do that, it's best to define what ransomware is. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I think just outlining really what people are using ransomware for and what it actually does is important. Ransomware is malware that's going to infect your system. It's going to take control of it or a portion of it. It may encrypt it in some way, and then the people that have done that encryption are going to ask for a ransom or a payment to get that data back. Attackers are normally going to demand payment in Bitcoin because it's an untraceable source of funds. And then they're going to hopefully, after you've paid, after a certain period of time, decrypt that data and give you that information back. So how this came to be is ransomware is a type of malware. So malware is basically anything that's going to corrupt your system in some form or another. It's usually transferred by email, but there are also other ways to do it. It could be a USB key, a memory stick. It could be a malicious website. Really any sort of threat vector is going to allow people to potentially get hold of that information. And the USB key is an interesting one. We've heard of attackers loading ransomware onto a USB key, putting a label on the key saying HR, for example, and they'll walk past a business they want to compromise and they'll drop it on the floor. And lo and behold, someone walks past and picks it up. They plug it into their PC or their laptop to see what's on it, and their device is attacked. It doesn't always have to be an email. It doesn't always have to be a link. There are multiple ways of infiltrating your business. It really started off in the past as okay, I'm an attacker and I need to understand what this company is, what they do, who their competitors are, so that I can infiltrate their network. I can find specific information that I know is valuable to them. I can control it and I can force them to pay me to release it. That was the start of it. It's a pretty tough ask. A lot of programming experience required, a lot of understanding of an industry and competitive field, and a lot of effort, was put into these high-level attacks. Unfortunately, it's become, like I said before, a much more automated process. Instead of having to understand the business, I can just go into any organization, get that ransomware installed, and lock up all their intellectual property. It creates a tough situation because now attackers don't care who they're attacking, and they're just going to go after everyone. Obviously, ransomware is a big one in the headlines because of the immediate financial impact it can have on a company. But we can talk a little bit more about some of the other threats and trends that we're seeing as far as attacks go. So this is our security insight. This is a tool that Barracuda used to track different types of attacks that we're seeing around the world. And you can see here that email is by far the most prevalent type of attack that we're seeing going on around the world. The reason that the email threat benchmarking is so important is that most cyber attacks start with phishing emails. These threats use multi-vectors like CEO fraud, infected email attachments, malicious website links, and like I mentioned before, removable media like USB devices. It's the most common form of cybercrime, with an average 3.4 billion spam emails sent every day. Year after year, the number of phishing attacks continue to increase, and obviously clearly represent one of the greatest threats to a business. So the first thing we talk about is phishing, and I'm guessing most people on this call are familiar with what phishing is, but it's basically someone pretending to be someone else to try and get the information from you. That could be personal information. It could be to get you to click a link, to get that ransomware installed. But if we take that a step further with something we call spear phishing, spear phishing is it's basically the same idea as phishing, but it's very targeted to a specific organization or individual. The other unique thing about spear phishing is that standard email gateways or email security products that prevent against links and malware, they're not in a position to pick these up. The reason is because there is no payload. There's no click this link. There's no attachment in these emails. They're a verified sender, for example. They're almost purpose built to bypass those gateway solutions. And it's just a string of attacks, so that it makes spear phishing, so dangerous here, because if an attacker can understand what an organization does, maybe the CEOs at a conference, for example, maybe they can track down an organizational structure on your website. They'll then know that's the person that's the CEO or CFO, and that's the person whose accounts payable. They can start constructing emails to make it look like they're the CFO and send it specifically to that person in accounts payable. People have their names and roles on their website, LinkedIn, for example. We publish this information onto the internet, which actually helps the attackers really understand who they should be targeting. Again, they could use that information. They could make a remark in their email, mentioning that they know they were in an event, in the previous week. Again, that lowers the guard of the recipient. They're referencing something that's happened in the real world, so it must be them. And then they can go in and follow up with that. And it's all about gaining trust and gaining information to lower those defenses, like I said, and obviously, get through that security. It's really important that you provide protection for these specific attacks, and use advanced threat mechanisms like artificial intelligence, and really understand how people send emails. Different attributes like how they sign their emails, so sentiment analysis, and what time of day they send their email, so we can use that information to better protect people on sending emails. It provides protection, but also it gives you something. There's something more important, and that's educating. your users, making sure they understand where to check to see if an email is coming from who it says it's coming from. Having them understand to hover over a link. The link might say it's going to Microsoft.com. What happens with that link when you hover over it? We call that the human firewall. Sadly, the biggest liability on a network or an organization is typically the people. And we always advise educating, simulating attacks to users to build them into that human firewall. So there are a couple of different strategies. A phishing email that might install malware or ransomware that will end up costing you immediate funds to get your data back. Or it could be that phishing email that's trying to harvest credentials. So very slowly infiltrate the organization or use it as a point of command and control to carry out other attacks to different organizations. I'm sure everyone's seen it before where you receive a suspicious email from a known sender, and very quickly it's followed up with, please ignore, my account was compromised, apologies. It's that land and expand approach. If I get into one account within an organization, I can spread within that organization, and then I have a route out to all of their contacts, anyone they've sent an email to in the past. So a lot of malicious things can go on through email that people really need to be paying attention to now more than ever. So again, just to kind of wrap up on the email side, we'll talk about a couple of different types of attacks that you should be aware of. Brand impersonation, business email compromise, and blackmail. And we're just going to define these quickly just so that you can recognize, what's going on in these situations. So the first and most common one is brand impersonation. Someone saying, hey, I'm Google, or I'm PayPal, or I'm Microsoft, for example. Your account's been compromised. It's going to expire. We're trying to make you verify that you are you. Please input your information so you don't get locked out. Now, I can guarantee that every single person on this call has received something along those lines, probably in the last 6 months. But this was a huge issue for PayPal. With email, you want to make sure you're also protecting your reputation. So it's not just about protecting what's sent and received, it's your reputation as a business. If you're a small business and someone's sending out emails saying that they're you, that could affect your reputation. So you need to have the tools in place to make sure you're protected. Implementing something like DMARC. DMARC is part of Cyber Essentials. It's part of cyber insurance for a lot of cases. Making sure that only you as the sender is validated to send as your domain. It's basically that rubber stamp. It's that wax mark on a letter all those years ago to say this is my sigil, this is my stamp, it's come from me. That's really what DMARC is. Otherwise you can get into a situation like PayPal did, where people were saying, hey, I've got this email from PayPal and I've verified my account like it asked me to, and now my PayPal balance is zero. PayPal's response is, well, you've been compromised. It's not a PayPal issue. We didn't get hacked. You were susceptible to a phishing email, but in the customer's mind, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they were wrong and actually it wasn't sent from PayPal. As far as they're concerned, it was a PayPal issue, and that's that brand reputational issue that we talked about. And again, another thing that you need to be aware of is to make sure you're aware of stuff coming into your organization, and you're protecting emails that are actually going out of your organization as well. If an account was to be compromised, they're going to exfiltrate that data out. You need to be aware of not just the bad things that are coming in, but also, what's leaving the organization as well. The second way that spear phishing attacks are delivered is through business email compromise. So this is an exploit which an attacker obtains access to an email account and imitates the owner's identity, in order to defraud the company and its employees, customers, your partners. Often an attacker will create an account with an email address almost identical to the one on the corporate network, relying on the assumed trust between the victim and their sender. Again, it's very easy to go out there and buy a domain for little to no money that looks very similar to a legitimate domain. So even if the user does click on the display name to see who the email's from, it's roughly the same. I've kind of checked it, but I'm going to respond and treat that as if it's a valid sender. A lot of spear phishing is used for this, and the troublesome thing here is that if an attacker is able to get that information about the company, they could even make a phone call. We're seeing attackers make a phone call in saying, hey, we're Microsoft, we need to verify your credentials. We're going to send you an email. Obviously, we don't want your credentials passed over the phone. We're going to send you an email now so that you can verify those. Now, again, it's almost like a two-pronged attack. Now a legitimate email account inside their organization's been compromised, it makes it so difficult to track down. And now these attackers can be, these attacks can be launched internally. The first thing an attacker will do is try and cover their steps once they're within your organization, which makes it even more difficult to, one, be aware that it's happened, and two, actually track down how they got in and what they've done since they've had access. You need technologies that are in place that are going to say, look, we've seen a legitimate login, but it's not from somewhere we'd expect. They normally sign in from Birmingham in the UK, for example, using Outlook for Windows 11. We suddenly see them sign in from France using Firefox, for example. You need to have that visibility. And the last one I want to talk about is blackmail. And it's been massively on the rise. So it's basically an attacker who's sending an email to say, look, we have information about your browsing history or something about your personal life that we're going to go and share with your employer, your family, and we're going to put you in a bad light unless you send us money. Otherwise, we're going to expose you. Most of the time, they don't have that information, but the scare, the fear that it puts into a person, it might convince them to send that money, and they're never going to report it and say, hey, I'm being blackmailed, because again, that fear factor of, if I report it and it goes public, they're going to release the information they have. And there are technologies out there to identify certain wording and phrasing in these types of emails and prevent them getting through. But it's a scare tactic that's going to force people to send money and obviously not report it. And they could take it to the next step where they say, give me your credentials to this server or to this system, or I'm going to expose this information. And of course, again, your organization ends up compromised. There are a lot of, scary things going on out there, and you need to make sure that you're protected. Working with a managed service provider like MPS is really important because they have the capabilities and the skill sets to focus on security trends and make sure that not only are you safe today, but as those trends change, you're obviously consistently protected as they do. And obviously looking at, how a ransomware attack can really, turn a business on its head. It's not only the fear of losing data, it's the downtime for your employees. It's the downtime in terms of being able to contact your customers. It's loss of productivity for you and your team. It's the time to restore and recover, and also make sure that your systems are safe. And that's not mentioning any reputational harm that might have happened. Your website gets compromised and they put a different splash page up. You can't answer the phone to your customers because your network's been attacked. It's huge, and people often think of an attack being, well, they've encrypted something. It can be so much more than that, and it can do so much damage. Again, the aftermath of having to rebuild computers. We're seeing on average, from a full ransomware attack, that it's 6 weeks to truly recover back to where you were before. And obviously you've got the cost in terms of lost revenue, possibilities of having to rip and replace hardware, pay overtime, for example. People often see the initial impact and don't look further down the line of what can actually happen. So, obviously ransomware is a big one in the headlines because of that immediate financial impact it can have on a company. But we can talk a little more about some of the other threats and trends that we're seeing as far as attacks go. As I mentioned at the start, today's malware is very different than what we saw a few years ago. There's a general perception in the marketplace among organizations that they think they have the tools. And so once those tools are in place, they don't need to invest or don't need to continually improve, to stay ahead of the attacks. But let's think about that for a second and compare that to our everyday work lives. back in the day, almost everyone, including myself, had a physical office where they'd go to for 9 hours a day, 5 days a week. Today, you can work from pretty much anywhere. Your living room, a coffee shop, an airport. But traditionally, working in an office or a fixed location meant that you could have a firewall. You could have that security in the office to protect your systems and obviously protect your users. But if you look at the new working locations, it's very difficult to take that office-based security on the go. And while the firewall, the WAF, for example, is doing a great job in the office, it's useless if you're remote unless you've got a VPN running into the network. Again, some organizations, spend a substantial amount of money on the most modern technology for their firewall, only to see their users pick up their laptops and go home and work remotely. As per Microsoft, there are over 300 million fraudulent sign-in attempts in their cloud services every day. Now, if you just take that in for a second, across 365, Azure, their other cloud services, over 300 million attempts to sign into an account. One thing you should definitely enable if you don't have it in place already is multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Now, it's an additional layer of security above and beyond usernames and passwords. I would hope that everyone on the call has that in place, and that's one step. We always talk about security being defense in depth or a layered approach. It's not just about having MFA. That's one piece of a larger puzzle to ensure your business stays safe. As I said earlier, another important thing that you really must do is educate users about email threats, what they are, what they look like, how to spot one, what to double check. Make sure that your employees can recognize those attacks and understand their fraudulent nature and know how to report them. If there's a 1% element of doubt in their mind that it's a legitimate email, they should be reporting it. They should be, getting a second opinion and leveraging the specialists around you, like MPS to be that second set of eyes to say, actually, no, you're fine. It looks a bit suspicious, but actually that's an okay email, or, you did the right thing to report it. That is malicious, and, we'll put steps in place to stop it coming in again. And again, domain fraud or domain spoofing is one of the most common techniques used in impersonation attacks. And as I said, DMARC is a technical standard that helps protect email senders and recipients from spam. This is something that you can put in place today. Get it into reporting mode, at least start building that visibility. But as I mentioned before, cyber essentials, cyber insurance, this is fast becoming a requirement. We've seen in the news that Google and Yahoo are about to enforce DMARC scanning on their emails. So again, the bigger companies, the bigger mail senders are starting to take this as a standard, not as a nice to have, but a standard for sending email. We look at basic cyber hygiene for business, and it's really a 5-step process. So the most important thing is to establish what you want to protect. What's the most important thing to your business? That if we were to delete it, remove it, take it away, has the biggest impact to you being able to continue to function, being able to continue to run as a business. Once we understand what that data is, or once you understand what that data is, we want to build these concentric rings of security around that data. And we're not just talking about one thing, a firewall, for example. We're talking about multiple different services that you can relay, from email security to endpoint protection, the firewall, for example. Those concentric rings are what keep you safe. You can't just have one point of failure in terms of security. It's about monitoring. So it's not just a case of putting these security measures in place and saying, right, that's done. I don't need to look at that again. I don't need to understand what's going on. It's working. It has to be monitored. It has to be looked at and understood, so that we can stay ahead of the game and make sure that critical data's kept safe. And then reducing the response time. So again, I mentioned earlier about if an account does get compromised, how long does it take for you to realize it's been compromised? How do you understand how they got in or how far that attack goes. And that could be something as simple as a sign in from an unusual location or an impossible sign in, but also having the tool set and capabilities to remediate if you are attacked. I don't think anyone can guarantee 100% that you'll never be attacked just because of the growth and rate of threats. The only way to do that really is to go offline, unplug the internet, unplug the power, go back to pen and paper. So being able to reduce the response time and have that action plan in place is critical for your business. And then obviously, people are what make businesses what they are. So securing people, process, and technology. This is a 5-step process that we think really works. And again, the most important of those is understanding what you really need to protect. And we're not the only ones that are pushing that multi-layered strategy. Again, the Securities and Exchange Commissioner, confirming that it's the most successful cyber strategy to adapt. I don't really think I need this slide. I think it's a person with a title, but realistically, having more layers of defense is more important. Locking your windows on your house is one thing. Bolting the doors, having a Ring doorbell, having cameras, the more layers you have, the more deterred the attackers are going to be. And then one last thing for me, I just wanted to give you a kind of insight into just how easy this has become for the attackers. So it used to be that you had to have some knowledge of programming, you had to have the resources behind you to carry this out. It's really not the case. Worm GPT is a take on ChatGPT, for example, but it's used for malicious purposes. It's free. You don't need to pay to use it. And again, this will just give you a kind of brief insight. So can you provide me with a list of tools used to generate a phishing link? There's my automated response. Pick the one that stands out to me as the one that really does what I'm looking for. Again, I don't even have to go on Google as attacker now and actually do some research. I can go in and look at the AI, ask it a question. It's going to give me the one that matches my needs the most. I'm going to put that in my my notepad for later. Now I don't even need to Google and find the README, the documents, the instructions. I'm going to go in and ask WormGPT again. And it's actually given me a step-by-step guide on what system I need to run it on, the best way to do it, and how to get ready to start sending out phishing attacks. At this point, all I've needed from a skills perspective is the ability to ask a question. Now, again, historically, people would have to build their own email. It would have maybe poor English or spelling mistakes or bad grammar. Don't need to do that anymore. I can ask the AI, and lo and behold, here's my email. I'm now going to go over to my my device that the AI advised me to use, and I'm going to start composing my email. Again, all I've had to do so far is ask it questions and copy and paste. I've grabbed my Microsoft logo. I'm just going to resize that so it looks a little bit more convincing. And I'm going to paste in the information that the AI generated for me automatically and for free. Actually, Microsoft uses slightly larger text on their informational emails, so I'm just going to make that a bit bigger, make it look slightly more legitimate. I'm going to think of a enticing subject to get the users engagement and their attention, and I'm going to add my recipients. Now, obviously, for this example, we just have one user. It's very easy to go and find email addresses out on the web. I'm now going to use my free app. I'm going to choose the credentials that I'm trying to harvest, which is Microsoft. I'm going to type in a number. Now, for anyone slightly more technical, you can start doing things like port forwarding. You can choose a custom port. I don't need to. I've chosen no for both. So nice and straightforward. This is getting launched, and it's going to ask if I want to mask the URL, so make it look even more difficult for the user. and it's generated the URL for me. I've asked questions, I've copied and pasted, and I've form filled. That's all I've done so far. No skill involved. I'm going to add my link. Again, I don't need programming skills to do this. I'm going to add that link that was generated. Click OK. And again, we haven't masked the URL for, just to show you how it looks, but obviously that could be a shortened URL. It could be a bit.ly link, for example. And I've sent the email. That's been delivered to the user. Again, these attacks don't typically get sent right in the middle of the day. They'll do this last thing in the day on a Friday, or they'll do it over the weekend, for example, so people are on a mobile device. I've got my email from Microsoft. I'm going to go in as a paranoid user that it's the weekend and I can't get hold of IT, so I'm going to click verify. I'm going to sign into my Microsoft account. Again, if this was a shortened URL at the top, it would mask it. I'm going to input my password. I'd normally expect MFA to come up, but because it's a recovery account, it's asked me to put in the email address. And you can see on the left-hand side, I've captured the user's email address, I've captured their password, and I've captured their IP address. So from here, I can go in and see what part of the world they're logging in from. So if they have any geo-IP filtering or ring fencing, I can go and turn on a VPN so that I come from that address, for example. I have their password. I can get straight into their account. And again, you can see, for a slightly different reason, the attacker is coming from Albania. But again, I could go in and I can change my region to the UK, for example, with NordVPN. I'm now coming from a UK IP address. So if Albania is on the block list, I'm going to get through. And I'm going to go in and log into the user's account. This really isn't about the signing into the user's account, although obviously it shows how that works. It's really designed to show you how easy this is. And this is not to promote you to go out and start doing this yourself. By all means, it's not. It's just to make you aware that you do not need to have a skill set. You think of these highly skilled hackers in a bunker somewhere. You don't need to be. You can go onto the dark web and you can get a toolkit with all of this pre-installed, and you just install it like you would any other application. So it's really just to drive home the simplicity around this, and AI will hopefully be used for good more than not, but you've seen in this use case here how easily it can be manipulated and used for the wrong reasons. And again, once the attacker's in, they're going to forward the emails to a personal address. They're going to create an inbox rule to delete sent items. So now every time this user receives a new email, the attacker gets a copy and the sent items get deleted. So no one is aware of what's going on. I hope that's useful. I hope it gives you a good high level as to what we're seeing, but obviously how attackers can start to use these new technologies for bad. I will hand you back to Tim, but yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I hope everybody found that interesting. I certainly did. So, how can MPS help? I think the first thing to say is that we're seeing the fallout from data breaches with increasing frequency, the aftermath, the cost, the disruption. And I think the first thing that we need to try and do is to help organisations understand that they are potential targets. Big corporates, I think, already got that message, and they've already got big budgets for cybersecurity systems, processes, so on and so forth. Doesn't necessarily help them. It doesn't necessarily prevent them from being compromised, but they've certainly got it. I think, based on my own experience in the SME small corporate space, that's not necessarily the case. So helping organisations understand their potential targets and why they're potential targets, I think, is important. And once they have that understanding, helping them to enhance their cybersecurity and recover in the event of a breach. Those are the two sort of fundamental high-level principles where I think we can assist. We could just look at the next slide, please, Amy. So yeah, let's look at those two areas in a little bit more detail. MPS cybersecurity is based on an analyze, prevent, detect, respond, and recover model using the multi-layered approach that Rob has mentioned so many times during his presentation. Requirement one, remember, is to enhance cybersecurity, and to do that, we need to analyze and prevent, and there are several relevant layers we can consider. First thing, cloud filtering of emails before they reach your infrastructure. That happens to be part of the Barracuda total email protection solution. Clearly critical. If we can catch stuff in the cloud before it even gets to you, that's got to be a good thing. Firewalls to control traffic flows between the public internet and private networks. Again, obvious. We want to control what's happening in terms of outgoing internet activity, and certainly what's coming back and what's coming in and who's coming in. We then got a second layer of email protection, inbox email protection, AI driven with an API, learning behavior of the user. It's a second layer of protection, but again, as Rob's alluded to, it's reckoned that about 94% of data breaches start with an email. So the more protection we can have as far as emails are concerned, the better. Endpoint antivirus protection needs to be loaded onto every server, every desktop, every laptop. Implement access controls, such as BitLocker on all laptops. Many of you will be familiar with BitLocker. It's an added layer, I should say, of security, which controls physical access to the device, to the hardware. And then again, Rob talked about multi-factor authentication, and everybody's going to be familiar with this. If you go online now and buy something with your credit card, I think typically you'll click on a button and it will send a code to your mobile phone, and you need to enter that code to authenticate the purchase. We can implement multiple levels of multi-factor authentication. Critical in the firewall area. A lot of businesses are using remote desktop services. They have remote workers who are coming into the infrastructure through the firewall without multi-factor authentication, having access to the hardware, and a password will enable you to access the servers. Multi-factor authentication, obviously, is another layer of protection from that perspective. In addition to that, we tend to use Outlook email multi-factor authentication as well, which requires reauthorization if ever you try to access your Outlook email account from anything other than hardware that has already been authenticated. So what that means is, if I have your credentials and I try and access your email account now from my laptop, I'll be asked to re-authenticate with multi-factor authentication, which is going to create an issue for me, which in the absence of multi-factor authentication would not be there. So the idea is very much to implement multiple security measures across different levels of IT infrastructure. Cyber threats are constantly evolving, and no protection is 100% secure. It's very possible that a layer may become obsolete or ineffective pending proactive intervention. So if one layer is breached, the principle is that others can still provide protection. Now, a lot of the technology that we're talking about there employs artificial intelligence and machine learning. So it's learning and responding to developing threats at a firewall level, at an email level, at an antivirus level, from an endpoint protection perspective. And it's automatically patching where it can. But some vulnerabilities will require engineer intervention, and Rob mentioned monitoring. Monitoring is key. This is a never-ending game of cat and mouse, if you like. You're never there. You can't buy a next generation firewall and think that's it. I'm covered. You're not, because I can guarantee you that within 6 to 9 months' time, the firmware that's operating on that firewall will almost certainly have developed, not developed, but it will almost certainly have a known vulnerability. And that firmware needs upgrading. And typically, that upgrade needs to be carried out by an engineer. Downtime is typically involved, so often on an out-of-hours basis. So if the infrastructure that we put in place is not being proactively monitored and managed, then every day that goes past, that infrastructure becomes increasingly unnecessarily vulnerable. And that's a really key message. Part of the misunderstanding that I've experienced so many times over the last couple of years in the SME sector is, I bought a firewall, or I bought this router. I thought that was it. Unfortunately, it's never it. As I say, it's a never-ending game of cat and mouse. The hackers will develop more and more sophisticated ways of compromising organizations, and the likes of Barracuda and other vendors will come up with ways to protect against that methodology, and you've just got to keep up with it. The other area that we can provide assistance with around the analyze and prevent scenario is with staff cybersecurity awareness, and also assisting with obtaining accreditations such as Cyber Essentials. It's an accreditation. It might be useful as an accreditation for an accreditation's sake, but in addition to that, it's a discipline. And again, as Rob mentioned, the human firewall is the most critical level of protection, but so often it's the weakest. And we're saying 94% of data breaches start with an email. 82% of the time, it involves a human element. So yes, we've sent an email, but ultimately, a human being has been misled into carrying out an action, and it's that action which has facilitated the data breach. Second fundamental area that I mentioned is the ability to recover in the event of a breach. As we've already said, unless you isolate your infrastructure entirely from the public internet and also human beings, there's no such thing as 100% secure. There's no guarantee that you're not going to get compromised. So we must be able to detect, respond, and recover. Our firewalls, our email protection solutions, our antivirus solutions all retain logs. And in the event of a breach, they can detect the source and nature of that breach and help us determine response. There's no point in recovering unless malware has been completely eradicated from every level of infrastructure. If it's still there, sitting on one member of staff's laptop, then it will infiltrate the entire infrastructure again, and you'll be back to square one. The vast majority of attacks that we're seeing are ransomware attacks. So it's basically a situation whereby we've stolen some data and we've encrypted all your data, and now we're going to hold you to ransom, or certainly try to. as far as what's stolen is concerned, the threat is going to be we're going to publish it on the dark web, or we're going to sell it on the dark web. With the log information from the firewall, from the email protection, from the antivirus solution, there is a chance that we can identify what in actual fact has left your systems, what's been stolen. So you can qualify, if you like, the criticality of that nature, the criticality of that data, I should say. Then you have encryption, of course, and the threat there is pay us the money, and if you don't pay us the money, we're not going to provide you with a decryption key. But as I say, if we can look at retained logs, study retained logs, we might have a better idea of, first of all, what's gone missing. So how do we deal with these hackers who are now talking to us over the telephone and demanding monies? And from an encryption point of view and a recovery point of view, if we're going to rebuild the infrastructure, we've got to make sure that any malware, that the malware that was there has gone. The big game changer in terms of recovery, we believe, and it's been demonstrated so many times, is what we call air-gapped backup. The ransomware attacks that we've seen result in primary data and local backups being encrypted. If all data is encrypted, quite obviously it becomes very difficult to recover. An air-gapped backup will back up data in a cloud environment, typically, which can't be accessed physically or electronically from the primary data source. So that data is often the difference between inconvenience and a successful recovery, or complete disaster and business failure. And I think Rob referred to that as a business-ending event. You don't have to look at the general media, too hard or for too long to read about business-ending events of really well-established businesses that have been around for a long, long time. And what's happened, they've been compromised and they've been unable to recover. And typically, the inability to recover is the fact that all data has been encrypted. So, next steps, and we've got that slide up here. After this webinar, we're going to send you an email, and we're going to provide you with some links to some MPS ebooks and white papers. And one of those is going to be 7 reasons SMEs are targeted by cyber criminals. It's relevant whether you're an SME or not. Small organizations outside the big corporate space are getting compromised, and this particular document explains why, and also the multi-layered approach that can be adopted to try and counter that. We're going to send you a link to a cybersecurity questionnaire that we have. You can complete it yourself, and we'll come back to you. We'll provide you with a free risk assessment, or you can cut to the chase and book a one-on-one cybersecurity consultation and start to plan how you're going to protect against threats and how you're going to deal with incident response if it does all go wrong and you do get compromised. So, as I say, very shortly we'll fire that information over to you, and if we can be of assistance, then please don't hesitate to contact us. Amy?
All right, so I know we are a little bit over time for those webinars. We greatly appreciate you joining us today. 2 questions did come in, so I do want to cover those. We understand if you do need to hop, but wanted to make sure we expanded upon those. And as always, if there's any questions that come up after you have time to digest all this information, or if any come to light later, feel free to reach out to to the team, and we would be more than happy to cover off with you on those questions. But the first one came in from David, and he was curious about your Midland phone services. Are they in Dudley?
Yes.
Yes.
David, I was part of a team that acquired Midland Phone Services from the Midland Phones Group in January 1996, and since then, as I mentioned in my introduction, we broadened the portfolio away from just phones, typically sold in the Midlands, to the broad portfolio that we have nowadays sold throughout the UK. So some considerable time ago now, we renamed the company MPS Networks Limited, but yeah, it's the same legal entity. It was what was Midland Phone Services Limited, based in Dudley Road, Briley Hill.
Awesome. And the final question is, how do we get started if we have little to no cybersecurity currently in place?
Best for me to answer that as well. As I mentioned, we're going to send you an email with links to ebooks, with a cybersecurity questionnaire. But the best thing to do is contact us, and let's get a cybersecurity consultation organised, and put a plan together for you to, as I said a moment ago, protect against threats and plan how you would recover in the event of a cyber breach. There's no obligation, but as I say, you can look at links, you can read collateral, you can complete a questionnaire yourself. Easiest and best thing to do is just get in touch with us and let one of our guys do all that for you, answer all your questions, put a plan together. Then it's entirely up to you what you do with that.
All right. Well, that is fantastic. Thank you again for your questions. And as mentioned previously, feel free to get in contact with the team if there's any questions we did not get to today, or if any come about. But wanted to thank everyone once again and pass it on over to Rob and Tim if there's any final parting words. But we greatly appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully you all learned some from this information and can help implement this into future.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you.